channel. My name is Jordan and this is going to be my space to talk all things books. So I'm excited to start my channel and welcome. So to start off for my very first video, I thought it would be fun to do my favorite books of all time. So these are standalone books. Almost all of them are standalone books. They aren't part of a series. It's the books I like as standalone. I will do another video on my favorite book series. Let's get right into it. The first book I'm going to talk about is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeymoon. I love this book. 5 stars. Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. I would describe it as a contemporary. It follows our main character. The tone of this book is interesting. I think that's what kind of pulled me in, because at first as you begin reading, it's very quirky, it's funny, it's witty, it's lighthearted, and then all of a sudden it takes this dark turn and you realize, 1, Eleanor has some significant substance use issues, and 2, she has suffered some sort of a horrible trauma in her life, and you kind of spend the whole book trying to figure out what exactly that trauma was that she experienced. And so that really kept my interest through the whole book. I was trying to figure out what the mystery was. So as you go on through the book, Eleanor ends up meeting, that's my cat. Eleanor ends up meeting a new co-worker at work, and they end up becoming somewhat of friends through kind of a chance encounter. The two of them end up saving a random stranger on the street, and through that they're kind of obligated to go through a few different social situations together, and they develop somewhat of a friendship. And one of my favorite parts of this book was watching Eleanor navigate all these new social situations. You can tell that she's very socially awkward. She does not follow social norms. She does not give a crap about society rules. She's very blunt and direct. She tells it like it is. There's so many good one-liners from this book. What I love about that is, from her perspective, it's everybody else that has the social awkwardness and that isn't following the rules. She's totally typical and fine. It's really everybody else. And I loved that. I think we can all learn from that. When you meet someone who's a little bit different, it can really show you that maybe I'm the one that's different. And it kind of changes your mindset, and I think that's something that we can all grow and learn from. So you see her go from being this really lonely person, living this isolated life, and thinking that that's fine because it's the better alternative to this horrible abusive situation, and everything that she's learned about people and relationships is negative, is traumatic, is hurtful. And it's like this beautiful thing to watch her form this friendship that's healthy, that's positive, that's warm, that's unconditional. And you see her kind of grapple with changing her mindset on what it means to have a friend. Okay, my next favorite book is a children's book, but it is one of my all-time favorite books, so I had to put it on this list. That book is Corduroy by Dawn Freeman. If you haven't read the book Corduroy, you need to go read it. It's a really sweet, cute children's book. It follows the main character, who's a teddy bear named Corduroy. He lives in a department store and he's very desperate for a family. He wants to be adopted, and a little girl comes and sees him, but her mom will not let her purchase the teddy bear because he's missing one of his buttons on his overalls. So it just follows Corduroy having a little adventure in the department store that night as he searches for a button because he really wants a family. And then it ends with Lisa, the little girl, comes back the next day, buys him, and she sews on the little button that he's missing. So I just think it's a really sweet story about hope and family and love. This book is also very near and dear to my heart because when I was in college and grad school, I used to work with special needs kids a lot, and one of my little guys was just obsessed with the book Corduroy, and it was so sweet. We had to read it all the time, and I'd have to make little cutouts of Corduroy and Lisa, and we'd act out the story. So it's just really nostalgic for me. It has good memories. It makes me happy. So this is definitely one of my all-time favorite books. Okay, so moving on to something a little bit more contemporary, a little bit more popular. My next favorite book, it's my favorite standalone book, but it is part of a trilogy that's very popular, and that is A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. Almost everyone who has read these 3 books says this second book is the best, and there's a reason for that, because it totally is. Now, I liked the first book. I loved this second book, and I hated the third book. I was so disappointed. You really do kind of need to read the trilogy to understand the second book. but I have to put it on this list because it was so good, and I've read just that second book at least 5 times since it came out, and so I have to have it on this list. So of course this book is part of the Court of Thorn and Roses series. It kind of picks up from the first book. It involves the main character Eyre, and she is a human, but she gets immersed in this land of the High Fae. So it follows a world that's kind of divided into different courts. So they have the courts, so they have the different seasons, and then they have the night court and the day court. She works together to battle this evil being to overcome it, but she endures quite a bit of trauma in the process. And she also falls in love with Tamlin, who's the High Lord of the Spring Court. So then you see the second book that I love kind of picks up from there. And I love this book because it's a bit of a transformation book. You see Eyre kind of really grapple with everything that she's been through, everything that she's done. She is no longer quite human in this book. She's gained powers and she's trying to understand how to fit into this new world. She also had made a pact with the High Lord of the Night Court, Rhys. Swoon. So it's kind of the story. It has a really great romance in it. It's like the best slow burn romance I think I've read in any book ever. It has lots of, you just see their dynamic. They have a lot of chemistry and flirting. It just, she kind of realized she's not the person that was in love with Tamlin. And it's just so good. There's so many moving parts. There's a lot of political intrigue that's happening between the courts as people fight for power and make alliances. So it really holds your interest, and it has a lot of different things going for it. The best book. Okay, next up is A Man Named Eva by Frederick Bachman. This book is so near and dear to my heart. If you haven't read it, you have to go out and read it. I loved it. I don't know if I can say enough good things about this book. So this book is actually by a Swedish author, and it follows our main character Uva, and it starts in the present, and you see him kind of struggling. You find out right away that he's a pretty grouchy, grumpy old man. And as you go through, it starts out kind of light and humorous as you watch him just kind of battle technology and battle the new generations coming up that of course don't know anything and don't know about cars and fixing things and are too techy. So it starts out kind of light and quirky, but then again it kind of has a dark undertone because you quickly realize he's actually trying to commit suicide. He's very methodically, rationally planning out a way to kill himself, and throughout the book he tries several times and it keeps getting kind of foiled. Uva has recently lost his wife and he is just very sad. He doesn't see the point in living anymore. He goes and visits her grave every day. It like tears your heart out. So as you're going through present day, he meets new neighbors and people in his neighborhood that won't quite leave him alone, that won't let him be just a grumpy old man and are pulling him out of his shell. And in the meantime, as you're going through modern day, you get to flash back to his childhood and you see all the events that led up to making him this grumpy, rigid, inflexible person that he is today. So he endured a lot of hardships in his life. He lost his mother at a young age. His father ended up dying. I think he was 16 when he lost his father, who he was really close to, and he lived this really isolated, empty life. He was taken advantage of a lot financially. He took some big losses due to a scam. So you can see he's kind of bitter about certain things. Like, he has just this strong sense of right and wrong because of how he was done wrong in his life, and that's a theme throughout the whole book. So my favorite part of the book, you guys can probably tell, I'm a total sucker for a really good romance, but it's the sweetest romance. He sees his future wife Sonia at a train station and he ends up just taking the train with her, totally out of his way, miles and miles and miles, just so he can keep talking to her. And she's just like this bubbly, kind person, and here's this like stoic Grinch who doesn't express his emotions, and I love that pairing. I love that chemistry that they have throughout the book. I think it's so beautiful. It's so fun. It reminds me so much of the movie Up, which is one of my favorite movies of all time, and they go through so much loss and heartache, and just to see them help each other through that, and to see Sonia like help Uva overcome things. They ended up facing a really tragic event. I don't want to give it away, but there's some like infertility and infant loss in this book, and that's something that I myself personally have experienced. And I think anytime that you read a book that touches something in your own heart that you've gone through, it just makes it a really special, more beautiful, more meaningful experience. So you just relate to the book more. I've dealt with infertility for years and years. And so just reading that book and seeing how they helped each other through that and they still had hope, it's beautiful. It's a good story. Everybody needs to go read it. Okay, next up is The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. This book was very, very impactful to me. I read it when I was pretty young. I think I was maybe in 4th grade when I first read this book. And I remember it really opened up my eyes to not only just the world, to my faith, to humanity. It's a powerful, powerful book. If you haven't read it, you've got to go get it. So this book is an autobiography. It's written by Corrie ten Boom, and it kind of talks about her experiences during World War II. Corrie's family ended up aiding the Jews that were in hiding from Nazi Germany. They ended up becoming the hub of this underground system that would hide and get them out of the country. Anyone who was fleeing persecution, whether it was Jews or just certain races or what's really amazing is just Corrie and Betsy, they end up getting caught, they end up going to a concentration camp, and the book portrays all of the horrific, traumatic, awful experiences from living in that concentration camp. And it's so beautiful to me to watch their faith throughout this process. They really had such a strong faith, and I remember that being really impactful to me as a young person reading this, as I was kind of struggling with, what do I believe, and is God real? Betsy in particular is so strong during this book. She ends up, so Betsy is Corrie's sister, and Betsy ends up dying in the concentration camp, but to the very end, like, she was praying for the soldiers that were persecuting her. Like, when she thought of them, she didn't express any hate or bitterness or wanting revenge. She really just had this overwhelming sadness because they were so full of hate, and she didn't think they were lost. She thought she could just reach them, and it's just such a powerful thing. Like, what if in our world we all had that attitude? I mean, I have a hard time if someone makes a mean comment to me, like, not snapping back, and here is this woman who was so persecuted and horrifically tortured and lived in these awful conditions that still would pray for these people that were persecuting her. I think that's so powerful. So I really recommend that book if you haven't read it. Okay, next up is Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. This is a book that's loosely based on the book of Hosea from the Bible. So it follows the main character, Michael, and then the other main character, who's Angel. Angel was sold into prostitution as a child. You know, she obviously grows up in that and becomes very hardened and very dead inside and very broken. You can tell in the text she's so broken, and she's just kind of turned herself off to any hope. So then we follow Michael, who's a very strong Christian. He lives his life for God, and God tells Michael to marry Angel, this prostitute. So he ends up going back and forth with her, you know, kind of trying to date her, and it does not go well. She ends up getting really badly beaten, and Michael actually goes in and takes her and marries her, and the story is just, like, the bigger theme is really God's redeeming love for us, hence the title. And it talks about how even though we continually turn away from Him, we kick and fight, and we are unforgiving and bitter, and even when we're our most unlovable, God still loves us. He still pursues us. There's just something really beautiful in the bigger meaning of the book that really kind of touches my heart. And this book, also, it's weird that I read this so much when I was younger, and it also has a theme of infertility in it. And now I read it as an adult, and it just has a different meaning to me, and I connect with it in a different way. I don't know if that ever happens to you guys, where you read books as a kid and then as an adult, and it's just like different things kind of call to you. That's weird. I just loved kind of all the biblical symbols throughout the book. It was really cool and really well done. Okay, last but not least is one of my favorite books of all time. This, I think, is currently my favorite book ever. So this is a classic book, and I had almost given up on reading more classic books because my goal for 2018 was to read a lot more classic books and get more familiar with some of the great works of literature that I had never read. And so I started out, I read maybe 3 or 4 big classic books, and I didn't like any of them. I actually DNF'd 2 of them because I thought they were boring. I couldn't connect with them. I couldn't get into the story. And I was sitting there thinking, what's wrong with me? These are such beloved books. Why can I not get into them? And thankfully, I tried one more because it was epically amazing. And that book is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. This book is so wonderful. It follows our main character, Jane, who's an orphan. She gets taken in by her aunt and uncle and cousins, and it's quickly apparent that she's very abused in that home, physically, emotionally. She's not welcome. She doesn't have a place in the world. So it follows her kind of dealing with that, and then she gets sent to a school, and the school also has pretty rough conditions. You can tell all of the children at the school live in poverty. They don't have enough food to eat, enough heat. A lot of them fall sick. But during her time at the orphanage, you see her kind of grow. So after her own strength. Her time at the orphanage, she's into teaching, but she decides that she's not really satisfied with her life. And this is like my favorite part of the book. I love this because if you are not happy with your life, change it. You know what I mean? There are some things in life you can't control, but you can definitely make changes if you are very unhappy. And I love that she just pulled herself up by her bootstraps, especially during a time when women did not have as much power, as much freedoms as we do today. She takes out an ad in the newspaper and she ends up getting a position to be a governess for a little girl. So she then goes into the home, and this is where she meets Mr. Rochester. Oh my gosh, this was like the best ever. So he is like this grumpy, grouchy man who is the head of the home that she's working for. So she's working for his ward. She meets him and he does not really follow social rules. He's pretty blunt and direct. He doesn't have a lot of social graces or charm. He just kind of lays it all out there. And you can see throughout their encounters that he's very intrigued by Jane because she's not just docile, she's not just following the rules either. She's got her own convictions, her own strengths and morals, and her own thoughts on topics. And she's not afraid to disagree with him. And they kind of have this fun chemistry that builds and goes back and forth. So they end up falling in love and getting engaged, but there is something that ends up separating them. I won't tell you what it is because it's a spoiler, but they end up separating for a while. So I just adored this book. I love the relationship between Mr. Rochester and Jane. Everything is so intense, and the way that he talks to her and the way that she talks to him, the language that they use is so beautiful. It had like this bittersweet ending that I just cried. Oh, actually I need to go read that book again, I think. So those were my top 7 standalone favorite books of all time. So feel free to like or subscribe or chat with me down below if you want to discuss any of these books further. Otherwise, I'll talk to you guys next time.